Good evening, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Ogorek, and I am a sophomore here at Bishop Chatard, and I'm also autistic. So, being autistic, I have gotten the opportunity to interact and talk with various other autistic people on social media. Some of them are verbal, some of them are nonverbal, some might be verbal in some circumstances and nonverbal in others. Some of them have jobs, others might still live with their parents for whatever reason. There's just a lot of varying abilities. However, one common theme that I've noticed is that a lot of them tend to not struggle so much due to their autism, so much due to a lack of accommodations that our world has to offer. So what I did was I posted in one of the Facebook groups and I asked them, what specific things do you struggle with due to your autism that could be helped or combated within an accommodation? By far, the most widely requested accommodations had to do with sensory processing differences. So one of the most biggest traits of autism is that we process the senses differently. So we're either hyper, which means over, or hypo, which means undersensitive to stimuli. One thing that is important to remember is that we aren't just either or. A lot of us might be hypersensitive to some senses, hyposensitive to others, and then we might have one or two that are a combination or else not affected at all. So in terms of accommodations, one of the things that we do to regulate ourselves is this thing called stimming. Stimming is basically any type of repetitive motion. Some of the more stereotypical ones with autism are hand flapping, rocking, and spinning, but it can also look like tongue clicking, blinking rapidly, twirling our hair, wiggling our fingers. And so in terms of accommodations, most people said that they would just like it if there were maybe free or low-cost earplugs, sunglasses, maybe bandanas for people to put over their noses if they're sensitive to smell, provided at events, schools, venues, and whatnot. Also, quite a few people said that they would like it if different venues and schools had little kind of calm, quiet areas where they could go to decompress should they get too overwhelmed. Because sometimes what happens is if we get either so overstimulated or so understimulated, we can either have a meltdown, which is basically when we lose control of ourselves, our brain goes into overdrive when we start yelling and screaming and crying and whatever, or we have a shutdown, which is where we basically just go quiet and shut down. So, like this one lady said that over the summer she went to a fair, and she said that the fair was overall a relatively enjoyable experience, except she ended up getting overwhelmed and had to leave. And she said that she would have really liked it if there was just maybe even a little tent or something where she could have gone to for just 10 minutes to calm down. So just, providing sensory aids, providing areas for people to calm down if they get too over or understimulated, and also just an overall a better understanding of what stimming is and what meltdowns are, because there have been autistic people who have had negative experiences, particularly with law enforcement and those who are in authority, because the person didn't understand what stimming and meltdowns were and thought that the person was like on drugs or whatever. Secondly, though, has to do with our unique communication style. So with autism, we kind of, in essence, we speak a different language from neurotypicals. And there are different aspects of that language. One of them is that we have a hard time picking up on subtle hints and subtle cues. So we need things to be incredibly specific and incredibly concrete. I saw on Instagram this one lady was shopping and there was a police officer at the grocery store. And for whatever reason, the officer thought that she was shoplifting. And so he went up to her and asked, "Hey, can I look into your bag?" And because this lady was autistic, she A, didn't understand the fact that you don't question law enforcement, and B, because the police officer didn't specifically state that he thought she was shoplifting, she thought that he was just randomly asking her to look into her bag for no reason. So she ended up declining his permission to search her bag, which, if you can imagine, did not go over well. Another thing is that, and this kind of ties into the sensory thing in a way, but it's different, is that we also tend to get overwhelmed, very overwhelmed, if there's too much information spewed at us at one time, and particularly if it's not written down. And I can actually testify to this through one of my own experiences. So in middle school science, we would occasionally do labs, And at first, the teacher would go up to the board and she would basically rush through the instructions, like 5 minutes before we did the lab, and there was nothing written down, there were no handouts. And what happened was I would end up having panic attacks every single time we did the lab, and I would have to leave because my brain would just get so overwhelmed with all the information that I had to process without any written down stuff. But luckily we had a quick little parent-teacher meeting, and so she started giving, the night before the lab, she started giving a sheet with instructions on it that we could highlight and look over, and she didn't give that sheet just to me, she actually gave it to everybody in the class. So as a result, not only just me, but everyone in the class was more prepared for the lab and had a better understanding of what we were supposed to do, and that way she didn't have to rush through everything at the beginning of class. So to kind of sum up, basically while we autistic people can struggle due to our autism, we also do tend to struggle a lot due to a lack of accommodations. It would be incredibly beneficial for us if there were more sensory supports such as hearing, earplugs, sunglasses, bandanas, and other similar things provided at various venues, schools, etc. And it would also be beneficial if different venues and schools had multiple areas set up throughout them where we could go to calm down if should we get too overwhelmed. And it would also be beneficial to us if non-autistic people work to learn how to better communicate with us in our unique language. So thank you for coming, and I hope you all have a great evening.